The Black Hour presents Hunteds, Season 1, where the shadows are never empty, and something is always watching. Episode 10 is on its way, but to survive that night, you have to start here. This is Episode 1, Grave's Grip. The night air in Willow Creek Cemetery was colder than it had been all week. Not the crisp kind of cold you expect in late October, but a deeper, bone-soaking chill, the kind that makes you want to wrap your arms around yourself, even if you're wearing a jacket. Miles Harrington stood by the old cast-iron gate, his flashlight beam cutting a thin path through the mist. He wasn't here because he wanted to be. He was here because Old Man Carter, the caretaker, had called him an hour ago, voice trembling over the line. "Something's wrong with the ground," Carter had whispered. "You need to see it before it changes again." Miles had known Carter all his life. The man had been digging graves in Willow Creek for nearly 4 decades. He didn't scare easy. So if Carter was nervous enough to call at midnight, it meant something was seriously wrong. The cemetery was silent, except for the occasional groan of the wind through the leaning headstones. Most of the graves here were old, 1800s old, their inscriptions eaten away by time. But there was something about the way the fog clung to the ground tonight that made everything feel watched. Miles stepped inside, the gate creaking shut behind him like it was sealing him in. His boots crunched against the gravel path, and every step seemed too loud in the dead air. Carter was standing by the far side of the graveyard, his lantern swinging slightly in his hand. His eyes were wide, darting toward the earth in front of him. Miles finally reached him. "What's going on?" he asked. Carter didn't look up. His voice was dry and thin. "The ground's breathing." Miles frowned. "What? Watch." Carter stepped back, pointing to a sunken patch of dirt in front of a crooked headstone. The name on it was barely legible, but the date read October 12th, 1897. For a moment, Miles thought Carter was losing it. But then, the soil shifted, like something underneath was pushing up, slow, deliberate, as if testing its own strength. The dirt rose, then sank again. Rose, sank, almost like lungs drawing breath. Miles took a step back. "Is it? I don't know," Carter said. "But I've been working here 39 years, and I've never seen Earth move unless a shovel's in it." The wind cut through them both, colder now, carrying with it a faint, rancid smell like meat left out too long. And from somewhere deep beneath that grave, Miles swore he heard it, a soft, wet scraping sound. Miles's flashlight beam trembled as he aimed it at the shifting soil. The movement was stronger now. Not a slow pulse, but a twitch like something trapped was struggling to get free. "Carter," Miles's voice was low-tight. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is." Carter shook his head, his weathered face pale. "I've buried people here, Miles. I've buried children. The ground doesn't do this. Not on its own." The smell thickened, a sour, clinging rot that curled in the back of Miles's throat. He gagged, covering his mouth with the inside of his jacket sleeve. The soil cracked open. Both men froze. From the darkness beneath, a shape emerged, pale, grayish, the skin stretched thin over bone. It was a hand, at first. Only the tips of the fingers showed, curling ever so slightly. Then the whole palm pushed through, nails jagged and black with clotted earth. The fingers twitched, then flexed, as if testing the cold air above ground. Miles stumbled back, boots slipping in the damp grass. "Shut up," Carter hissed, though his own voice shook. "Just watch." The hand groped at the loose soil, feeling its way upward. The wrist followed, coated in thick, wet clumps of dirt. A low, muffled sound rose from below. Not a groan exactly, but a strained, inhuman rasp. Miles's instinct screamed run. Every muscle in his body wanted to turn and bolt for the gate. But he couldn't. His eyes were locked on that grave. The ground collapsed further, and whatever was under there began to push harder, the earth breaking apart in clumps. Miles could see more now. A forearm, skin torn and hanging in strips, like it had been gnawed from the inside out. Carter took a step forward, lantern in hand. "Don't," Miles snapped. But Carter ignored him. "I need to know if this is—" The hand shot upward, clawing into Carter's jacket. The lantern swung wildly, spilling light over the grave as Carter shouted in shock. And in that light, Miles saw something worse than the hand. Beneath the soil, a face was staring up at him, skin waxy, eyes clouded over. Lips pulled back in a smile that was far too wide. The lantern's glow flickered across that face, catching the deep shadows in its sunken cheeks. Its teeth, yellowed and cracked, were bared in a rictus grin. Mud clung to its matted hair, worms writhing where the scalp split. Carter's scream cut through the night. The hand gripped tighter, pulling him down toward the open grave. The soil shifted under his boots, sucking him toward the hole like it wanted him to. Miles finally moved. He lunged forward, grabbing Carter's arm and yanking hard. The thing below growled, a wet, bubbling sound, and its other hand broke through the earth, grasping at Carter's leg. "Pull, damn it!" Carter shouted, panic slicing his voice raw. Miles braced his feet in the mud and hauled with everything he had. Carter's boot tore free from the skeletal grip, but only for a moment. The fingers hooked around his ankle again, harder this time, nails digging through the leather. The ground opened wider, and the thing's head emerged fully now. Its eyes weren't human anymore, just pale, milky orbs that swiveled toward Miles with a slow, deliberate turn. The smile widened. "Miles," it gurgled. The voice was wet, thick with soil. "I remember you." The words hit him like a blow to the gut. Miles had never seen this thing before. Had he? But something about the way it said his name, the way those ruined lips wrapped around it, made his skin crawl with a sick recognition. Before he could answer, the ground gave way completely. The thing exploded upward, half its body now above the surface, dragging Carter with it. Its chest was sunken, ribs pushing through the thin skin. And from the open cavity, something moved, something small, black, and alive. Carter was screaming now wild animal sounds. His nails tore at the dirt, at Miles's coat, at anything that could hold him above the grave. Miles reached again, and that's when the lantern fell, hitting the dirt with a dull thud. The flame flared, then went out. The cemetery was swallowed in darkness. The instant the light died, the night pressed in, a suffocating, wet blackness. Miles couldn't even see Carter's face, only the frantic sounds of his gasping and the gritty scrape of nails against soil. Then that breathing, not Carter's, slow, ragged, wet. It came from directly in front of them, where the grave yawned open. "Miles," the thing whispered again, voice now lower, closer to his ear than it should have been. A cold, slick hand brushed his ankle. Miles kicked hard, boot connecting with something soft that gave way with a sickening crack. A muffled grunt came from the darkness, followed by the scraping rush of soil as the thing shifted. Carter was thrashing. "It's on me. It's—" His voice was cut off with a choking sound, like something had clamped over his mouth. Miles dropped to his knees, blindly reaching, hands sliding over mud, over something wet and warm that pulsed under his palm. Not Carter. It twitched violently. From somewhere above, a faint light began to glow, a pale green shimmer, not from the lantern, but from beneath the grave itself. It pulsed through the cracks in the earth like veins of fire. And then the smell hit him. Rot, Yes, but also something metallic and sharp like hot blood. The light grew brighter. He could see now. The thing was wrapped around Carter, its jaw unhinged wider than human, teeth sinking not into flesh, but into the shadow that clung to him. And that shadow was moving, screaming in a voice that wasn't Carter's. Miles froze. This wasn't just a corpse. It was feeding on something deeper. Carter's eyes rolled back, his limbs jerking in spasm. The thing's milky gaze locked on Miles over Carter's shoulder. That grin again. It let go of Carter, letting him slump into the mud, and began pulling itself fully from the earth. The green light bled from its open chest cavity, illuminating rows of black, writhing worms inside. Each worm had tiny, snapping teeth. "Miles," it said, crawling toward him, "you left me here." Miles's mind was a frantic storm. That voice, the way it said his name, the words "you left me here." He'd heard them before. Not last week, not last year, but long ago, on a night he'd tried to drink away ever since. It was senior year, the night of the storm. The night his truck had gone off the road near Hollow Creek Cemetery. The night he crawled out alive and left someone else screaming in the dark. "Mason," Miles whispered before he could stop himself. The thing twitched at the name, head jerking like a broken puppet. The worms inside its chest writhed faster, spilling a faint mist that smelled of wet copper and grave dirt. "Miles," it rasped, voice layering Mason's familiar tone over something deeper, older. "You promised you'd come back." Miles scrambled backward, boots slipping in the mud. Carter groaned somewhere behind him, but he couldn't risk looking away. The thing was faster than it had any right to be. It lunged, a skeletal hand clamping around Miles's wrist with bone-crushing force. Cold shot through his arm, not skin deep, but into his blood, freezing his heartbeat. Images flooded his mind, water rushing into a car, fingernails clawing at glass. Mason's wide eyes reflecting lightning before they went still. Miles screamed, jerking free and rolling into the muck. The lantern flickered back to life beside him, throwing warped shadows across the gravestones. But the thing didn't shrink from the light. It smiled. "You brought me another," it hissed, glancing toward Carter. And then, with a sound like tearing fabric, it began sinking back into the earth, pulling Carter's limp body toward the open grave. Carter's eyes fluttered open just long enough to meet Miles's, and in them, Miles saw the same terror Mason had worn years ago. Miles's knees locked. Every part of him screamed to run. The wet soil around the open grave was collapsing inward, as if it were swallowing Carter whole. His friend's boots kicked weakly, heels scraping at the earth. "Miles!" Carter's voice was muffled, choked, as the dirt pulled higher over his chest. Lightning ripped across the sky, painting everything in bone-white light. Miles saw the skeletal hands, more than one now, reaching up from inside the grave, gripping Carter's arms, his neck dragging him under. Some were long decayed, tendon hanging like rotting twine. Others looked freshly dead. Miles's breath came fast and shallow. His memory screamed, "Not again." The wind whipped against him, carrying the smell of stagnant water and something far older, like a crypt cracked open after centuries. And then came the voice. Not Mason's this time, a woman's. "You go down, you don't come back." Miles spun. The cemetery was empty except for him, Carter, and the sucking grave. But the whisper came again, close enough he felt it in his ear. "Choose, boy, like you chose before." His stomach twisted. This was no longer just Mason's ghost. This was something that knew him, that fed on choices like his. Carter's head was almost under now, eyes wide, dirt spilling into his mouth as he tried to shout. "God damn it!" Miles roared, throwing himself forward. He grabbed Carter's arm and pulled, but the ground fought back, holding Carter like wet cement. The skeletal hands tightened, one curling cold fingers around Miles's own wrist. The cold was worse this time, deep enough that Miles swore he felt his heartbeat stutter. The earth groaned, and then Miles's footing gave way. Both of them were yanked downward into the dark. The fall was silent. No rush of air, no scrape of dirt, just an instant of weightlessness before Miles slammed into something cold and wet. His lungs seized as icy water swallowed him whole. Carter thrashed nearby, his muffled yells bubbling through the pitch-black flood. Miles kicked upward, but his hands met not open air. A ceiling of packed soil and tangled roots pressed down on him from every direction. Not water, Miles realized. Grave runoff. The stench was unbearable. Rot, old bones, and the faint sweetness of decay. Something moved through the blackness beneath his feet. At first, Miles thought it was Carter, but then pale fingers curled around his ankle. They weren't pulling, they were feeling, tracing the shape of him like a butcher inspecting a cut of meat. A voice, not in his ears but in his head, hissed, "We've been waiting." Carter's body collided with his, clutching his arm in panic. They both kicked hard, breaking the grip of whatever was below them. But the water seemed to thicken, clinging like syrup, dragging them slower with every movement. Miles's hand broke free into air. He found a pocket just big enough for his face. He sucked in a gasp, coughing mud and stagnant water. Carter tried to do the same, but the unseen hands caught him again, jerking him downward into the dark. "No!" Miles lunged, his own arm disappearing into the sludge. His fingers brushed Carter's sleeve, and then something else closed over his hand. It was soft, warm, still beating. A human heart. Miles ripped his arm back with a scream, but the thing holding it didn't let go. The thing clutching Miles's hand pulsed, not just with a heartbeat, but with many. Every thud was out of sync, like a chorus of dying drums. He yanked hard, finally tearing free, but the sensation of that warm, slick mass still clung to his skin. From the black depths, Carter burst upward, but not alone. Hands, dozens of them, pale, wrinkled, mottled with soil. Some were missing fingers, others had nails split down to the bone. They clung to his face, his chest, his throat, pulling him back down as if they owned him. "Miles!" Carter's scream cut off as something yanked him under again. Miles dove, blind, his arms slicing through the muck. His fingers found Carter's hair, then his jaw, then teeth. Not Carter's. A face surfaced between them, or what was left of one. Skin sloughed away in ribbons, eyes cloudy and sunken. Its mouth split open wider than human, revealing rows of blackened teeth, and lodged between them a fragment of Carter's shirt. Miles shoved it away, but more faces rose from the dark. They came silently, as if the water itself had shaped them, their open mouths leaking mud instead of breath. A shape loomed deeper below, massive, skeletal, but threaded with raw, glistening muscle. Its ribcage moved in slow, deliberate rhythm. The water around them quivered, as if it were all one living thing. That same voice filled Miles's skull again. "You shouldn't have dug here." Something closed around his leg and yanked, not toward the bottom, but into the bottom. The soil opened like a hungry mouth. The ground didn't just swallow Miles, it absorbed him. Dirt pressed against his face, flooding his nose and mouth, but he didn't suffocate. Instead, he could hear it. A deep, low hum vibrating in his bones, like thousands of voices whispering under the same breath. He opened his eyes and realized he could see. Roots, thin and pale, wove through the soil like veins. But they weren't feeding plants. They were feeding bodies. Dozens, maybe hundreds, of corpses curled in the fetal position, their skin pierced by the roots as if they were being fed to or from something bigger. Carter was there, not moving, but his chest rose and fell. Roots curled around his arms and neck, pressing against his skin, searching for a way in. Miles, his voice was a dry rasp, his eyes unfocused. "It's feeding me. No, it's taking me." Something shifted behind the bodies, something massive. The soil bulged, and from it, a skull emerged. Not human. Long, distorted, with jawbones like a split coffin lid. Roots dangled from its sockets, swaying like worms. It leaned close, and the hum grew, so loud Miles felt his own heartbeat change to match it. "Every grave is a seed," it whispered without moving its mouth. "And you are ripe." Miles felt the roots brush his skin, cold as wet glass. One slid along his jaw, then up toward his eye. Miles thrashed, but the soil was heavy as iron. The roots slid across his eyelid, prying gently, almost tender, like it didn't want to hurt him, only enter. Carter's head rolled toward him, lips trembling. "It doesn't let you die," he gasped. "It keeps you in the dark forever." Then his body jerked once, twice, and stilled. The roots around him tightened, and with a wet crack, pulled him into the skull's mouth. The humming stopped. Silence. Then, a rush of soil, and the crushing weight was gone. Miles was on the surface. The graveyard looked the same, except every headstone now bore his name. Each one, Miles Reed. Each one with a different date of death. Behind him, the ground shifted. A pale hand broke through the dirt, grasping at the night air. Then another, dozens, hundreds, and from every open grave, a voice in perfect unison. "We were here before you, and we will be here after." Miles turned to run, but his feet rooted in place. Literally, pale roots sprouted from his ankles, digging into the earth. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the hum returning, vibrating from inside his own skull. Darkness closed over him,